The blood from Hannah Jameson's split lip stained the white cotton of her handkerchief as she stared at her reflection in the cracked mirror of her bedroom. Her once bright hazel eyes now seemed dulled by the bruised shadows that bloomed beneath them, courtesy of William Sullivan, the man she'd foolishly believed loved her. The year was 1882, and in Cody, Wyoming, a woman with bruises and no husband had few options and even fewer friends. Hannah winced as she dabbed at her injuries. William had been especially cruel this time, his rage fueled by whiskey and baseless accusations. 6 months of courting had turned into a year of torment after he'd shown his true nature, but tonight had been the last straw. While he slept off his drunken stupor, she had packed her meager belongings, taken the small amount of money she'd managed to hide, and slipped away into the night. The room she'd rented at the edge of town was small but clean, the landlady asking no questions when Hannah arrived with her face half hidden by her shawl. The older woman had simply nodded, taken Hannah's payment for 2 weeks, and shown her to the room. Now, as dawn broke over the distant mountains, Hannah knew she needed a plan. Her funds wouldn't last forever, and William would surely come looking for her once he realized she was gone. Cody wasn't large enough to hide in forever. A knock at the door startled her, making her heart race. Had he found her already? "Miss, are you decent?" "There's breakfast downstairs if you're wanting some," called the landlady's voice. Hannah released her breath. "Thank you, I'll be down shortly." She splashed water on her face, careful of her bruises, and pinned up her auburn hair. The dress she put on was plain but serviceable, high-necked to hide the marks on her collarbone. With a deep breath, she descended the narrow staircase to the small dining room where 3 other boarders sat at a long table. An elderly couple nodded politely before returning to their porridge, but the third boarder, a tall man with broad shoulders and sun-weathered skin, stood when she entered. His dark hair was neatly combed, though a stubborn lock fell across his forehead, and his eyes were the deep blue of a summer sky. "Madam," he said, tipping his head respectfully before resuming his seat. Hannah slid onto the bench across from him, keeping her eyes lowered as the landlady set a bowl of porridge before her. She could feel the stranger's gaze but didn't look up until he spoke again. "Name's Isaac Blackburn, just passing through on my way to my brother's ranch outside of town." Hannah hesitated before responding. "Hannah Jameson. Pleasure to meet you, Miss Jameson." His voice was deep but gentle with a slight southern drawl. She risked meeting his eyes and found no judgment there, only a quiet understanding that made her wonder how much her face revealed about her situation. "You in town long?" he asked, breaking a piece of cornbread. "I'm not sure yet," she replied carefully. Isaac nodded as if her vague answer made perfect sense. "Cody's a good place, growing fast since the railroad came through." The conversation lulled as they ate, but it wasn't uncomfortable. There was something soothing about Isaac's presence, a steadiness that Hannah found herself drawn to despite her wariness of men. "You looking for work, Miss Jameson?" the landlady asked as she refilled coffee cups. Hannah hadn't thought that far ahead, but she nodded. "Yes, I suppose I am. My sister runs the mercantile. Lost her assistant last week when the girl got married and moved to Cheyenne. Might be worth asking if you've got experience with numbers and such." "I do, actually. My father was a schoolteacher." It was the first time Hannah had mentioned her past to anyone in Cody. "Well then, you stop by and tell Martha that Ida sent you. She opens at 9. "Thank you, Mrs. Just Ida is fine, dear." Isaac stood, placing his hat on his head. "I'll walk you there if you'd like, Miss Jameson. I've got business at the mercantile myself this morning." Hannah's first instinct was to refuse, but something in his steady gaze reassured her. Besides, walking with a man might discourage William if he was already searching for her. "Thank you, Mr. Blackburn. That would be kind." Half an hour later, they stepped onto the boardwalk that lined Cody's Main Street. The morning was clear and cool, the street already busy with wagons and riders. "If you don't mind my saying, Miss Jameson, you seem like a woman running from something." Isaac's voice was low, meant only for her ears. Hannah stiffened. "I don't see how that's your concern, Mr. Blackburn," he nodded, accepting her rebuke. "It's not, but I'd like to make it clear that if you need assistance, I'd be happy to provide it. Why would you help a stranger?" The question came out more sharply than she intended. "Because my mother raised me to believe that offering help to those in need is what makes us human." He smiled slightly. "And because I've seen that look before in my sister's eyes, before she finally left her no-good husband." Hannah's steps faltered. Is she all right now?" "She's running my brother's household and bossing us all around like she was born to it. Took time, though." His eyes met hers. Healing usually does. Before Hannah could respond, a shout from across the street made her blood run cold. "Hannah, there you are, you deceitful witch." William Sullivan staggered toward them, his face contorted with rage. Even from a distance, Hannah could smell the whiskey on him. "Is that him?" Isaac asked quietly, moving slightly in front of her. She nodded, her throat too tight for words. "Get behind me," Isaac said, his tone brooking no argument. William reached them, swaying slightly, his bloodshot eyes fixed on Hannah. "Thought you could just leave, did you? After everything I've done for you?" "The lady doesn't want to speak with you," Isaac said, his voice level but carrying an undercurrent of steel. "I suggest you move along," William sneered. "This ain't your business, cowboy, that's my woman." "I am not yours," Hannah said, finding her voice at last. "I never will be again." William lunged forward, but Isaac was faster, catching the man's arm and twisting it behind his back in one smooth motion. "Now, friend," Isaac said, though there was nothing friendly in his tone, "I'm only going to say this once. The lady has made her choice clear. You're going to turn around, walk away, and never approach her again. Otherwise, you'll be having a conversation with the sheriff after you pick yourself up off the dirt." "You threatening me?" William snarled. "Just stating facts," Isaac replied calmly. A small crowd had gathered to watch the confrontation. Hannah noticed the sheriff among them, his hand resting casually on his gun belt. "Everything all right here?" the lawman called. Isaac loosened his grip on William but didn't fully release him. "Just a misunderstanding, Sheriff." "This gentleman was just leaving town, weren't you?" William jerked free, straightening his rumpled shirt. His eyes met Hannah's, filled with hatred. "This isn't over," he hissed. "Actually, it is," the sheriff said, stepping forward. "I know trouble when I see it, and you've got the look. I suggest you follow the lady's wishes and Mr. Blackburn's advice. Cody doesn't need your kind." For a tense moment, Hannah thought William might lunge again, but finally, he spat on the ground and stalked away toward the saloon. "Thank you, Sheriff," Hannah said quietly. The older man nodded. "No need for thanks, miss. Cody's a peaceful town, and we aim to keep it that way." He turned to Isaac. "Good to see you back, Blackburn. How's that brother of yours? Ornery as ever, but prospering. The ranch is doing well. Glad to hear it." The sheriff tipped his hat to Hannah. "Madam." As the crowd dispersed, Hannah realized she was trembling. Isaac noticed too, guiding her to a bench outside the mercantile. "Take a minute," he said gently. "That took courage." "I don't feel courageous," she admitted. "I feel terrified he'll be back. Not if he's smart." Isaac sat beside her, leaving a respectful distance between them. "And if he's not smart, well, the sheriff and I will have something to say about that." Hannah studied him, trying to understand why this stranger would put himself between her and danger. "Why are you helping me?" Isaac's expression softened. "Because no one should have to face men like that alone, and because—" He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "Because I've seen what men like him can do to good women, and I've sworn I'd never stand by and let it happen if I could help." There was a story there, Hannah thought, but now wasn't the time to ask. "Thank you," she said simply. "No need for thanks. Now let's see about that job, shall we?" Inside the mercantile, Martha Hopkins, a brisk woman with graying hair and sharp eyes, looked Hannah over with an appraising gaze. "Ida sent you, did she? Well, I do need help, especially with inventory coming next week." Her eyes lingered on Hannah's bruised face, but she asked no questions. "You know your figures?" "Yes, madam, and I can write a fair hand." "That'll do. 6 days a week, Sundays off." 8 to 6 with an hour for dinner, $3 a week to start. She named a fair wage for a shop girl. If you suit, we'll talk about a raise after a month. Thank you, Mrs. Hopkins. When would you like me to start? Tomorrow morning will do, 8 sharp. With the position secured, Hannah felt the first stirring of hope. A job meant income, and income meant independence, something she'd never truly had before. As they left the mercantile, Isaac tipped his hat to her. I'd best be getting to the ranch. My brother's expecting me. Hannah felt a surprising pang of disappointment. Of course. Thank you again for your help today, Mr. Blackburn. Isaac, please. He hesitated. Miss Jameson, I don't wish to be forward, but I'll be in town again on Saturday for supplies. Perhaps you join me for dinner at the hotel. Hannah's first instinct was to refuse. The last thing she needed was another man in her life, no matter how kind he seemed, but there was something in Isaac's steady gaze that made her reconsider. I don't know if that would be wise, she said honestly. He nodded, unsurprised. I understand your caution, but sometimes company for a meal is just that, company, no expectations beyond conversation. Hannah found herself smiling slightly. In that case, I'd be pleased to accept. Saturday, then, 6 o'clock at the Cody Hotel dining room. He smiled, a warm expression that reached his eyes. Until then, Miss Jameson. As she watched him mount his horse and ride away, Hannah felt something she hadn't experienced in a long time, a flicker of anticipation that wasn't tinged with dread. It was too soon to call it hope, but perhaps it was a start. The next few days passed in a blur of learning new routines. Martha proved to be a demanding but fair employer, and Hannah quickly grew comfortable with the store's operations. The work was straightforward: organizing merchandise, helping customers, keeping the ledgers balanced, and the routine was comforting after months of walking on eggshells around William's volatile moods. She'd seen no sign of William since their confrontation, though she remained wary, starting at loud noises and keeping her back to the wall whenever possible. Each night, she locked her door securely, pushing a chair against it for good measure. By Saturday, Hannah found herself actually looking forward to dinner with Isaac. She'd been alone for so long, even before leaving William, that the prospect of conversation with someone who seemed genuinely interested in her thoughts was appealing. She wore her best dress, a modest blue cotton that brought out the green in her hazel eyes, and arranged her hair in a simple but elegant style. The bruises on her face were fading, easier to cover with a light dusting of powder. As she entered the hotel dining room, she spotted Isaac already waiting. He stood when he saw her, and Hannah couldn't help noticing how different he looked from the dusty cowboy she'd met days before. His dark hair was neatly trimmed, his shirt crisp white beneath a well-cut vest, though he still had that rebellious lock of hair that fell across his forehead. Miss Jameson, he said with a smile, pulling out her chair. You look lovely. Thank you, and please call me Hannah. Hannah, he repeated, as if testing the sound of it. It suits you. The dining room was the finest establishment in Cody, though it would have been considered modest in a larger city. Still, the white tablecloths and polished silver gave the meal a sense of occasion. Over roast beef and potatoes, Hannah found herself sharing stories of her childhood in Pennsylvania, her father's small school, and her mother's garden. Isaac proved an attentive listener, asking thoughtful questions and sharing his own tales of growing up on a small farm in Virginia before the war changed everything. My father didn't come home, he said quietly. My mother held things together as long as she could, but eventually we lost the farm. That's when we headed west, mother, my brother James, my sister Elizabeth, and me. I'm sorry about your father, Hannah said sincerely. Isaac nodded his acknowledgement. It was a long time ago. We made a new start here. James staked a claim on some good grazing land about 15 miles outside of town, built it up from nothing into one of the best small cattle operations in the territory. And your mother and sister? Mother passed 3 years ago, influenza. A shadow crossed his face. Elizabeth. Well, she married badly. Took her 5 years to find the courage to leave. She lives at the ranch now, helping James with his 2 young ones since his wife died in childbirth last year. I'm sorry for so much loss in your family, Hannah said softly. Isaac's smile returned, though tempered. Life out here isn't easy, but it's good. Honest work, open spaces, and family that stands by you, that's worth something. As the evening progressed, Hannah found herself increasingly drawn to Isaac's straightforward manner and quiet strength. There was no artifice in him, no hidden agenda she could detect. May I ask you something, Hannah? Isaac said as they lingered over coffee. Of course. That man, William, how long were you with him? Hannah tensed slightly but answered honestly. Almost a year. He wasn't always as you saw him. In the beginning, he was charming, attentive. She stared into her coffee cup. By the time I realized who he truly was, I was already trapped. How so? My father died last year. The school board didn't renew my position teaching, saying they needed a male instructor instead. William offered me security, a future. Her voice grew bitter. What he didn't mention was the price I'd have to pay. Isaac's expression darkened. No man has the right to raise his hand to a woman. Ever? Many would disagree with you, Hannah said softly. Then many are wrong. His conviction was absolute. My father taught us that strength is meant to protect, not harm. A man who uses his strength against those weaker than himself is no man at all. The simple truth of his words warmed something in Hannah that had grown cold over the past year. Thank you for saying that, she said. And thank you for a lovely evening. It's been restorative. The pleasure was mine, Isaac replied, his blue eyes warm. May I walk you back to your boarding house? The night air was cool as they strolled through Cody's quiet streets. Their conversation had shifted to lighter topics, books they'd enjoyed, the upcoming Founders' Day celebration, Isaac's tales of cattle drives, and the characters he'd met along the way. At the steps of the boarding house, Hannah turned to face him. I've enjoyed this evening very much, Isaac, as have I, he hesitated. I'll be in town again next Saturday. Perhaps we could do this again. Hannah found herself smiling. I'd like that. Good night then, Hannah. He reached for her hand, his touch gentle as he brushed his lips across her knuckles. Sleep well. As she watched him walk away, Hannah felt a curious mixture of emotions, pleasure at the evening they'd shared, wariness born of hard experience, and something else. A tentative hope she scarcely dared acknowledge. Inside her room, as she prepared for bed, she caught her reflection in the mirror. The bruises were fading, but the wariness in her eyes remained. Trust, once broken, was not easily rebuilt. Yet something about Isaac Blackburn made her want to try. The following Thursday, Hannah was organizing a shipment of dry goods when the bell above the mercantile door jingled. She looked up to see a striking woman in a well-tailored riding habit enter, her dark hair arranged in a practical but becoming style beneath a small hat. Good morning, Hannah greeted. May I help you find something? The woman approached the counter with a warm smile. You must be Hannah. I'm Elizabeth Blackburn Reed, Isaac's sister. Hannah's surprise must have shown on her face because Elizabeth laughed, a rich sound full of genuine amusement. I see my brother didn't mention I might be stopping by. Typical Isaac thinks women need protecting from even the smallest surprises. She removed her gloves. In truth, I was curious to meet the woman who's got my stoic brother making special trips to town. Hannah felt heat rise in her cheeks. We've only had dinner once, Mrs. Reed. Elizabeth, please, and once is significant for Isaac. He's not one to seek out company lightly. Her expression sobered. My brother mentioned your situation not in detail, but enough for me to understand. I hope you don't mind. I'm not sure how I feel about that, Hannah admitted. Of course, I'd be angry in your place. Elizabeth sighed. Men, even good ones like my brother, sometimes forget to consider a woman's privacy. But I didn't come to pry or make you uncomfortable. I came because. She paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. Because I understand something of what you've endured. And I thought you might like to know you're not alone. Hannah studied the woman before her, confident, well-dressed, clearly respected. It was hard to imagine her cowering before a man's raised hand, yet something in her eyes spoke of shared experience. How did you rebuild your life? Hannah asked softly. One day at a time, Elizabeth answered. With the help of my family, and by learning to trust my own judgment again. She smiled ruefully. The latter was perhaps the hardest part. Martha emerged from the storeroom then, exclaiming with pleasure at seeing Elizabeth. The conversation turned to more general topics: the upcoming shipment of fabrics Elizabeth had ordered, news from outlying ranches, the spring weather. As Elizabeth prepared to leave, she turned to Hannah. I'm hosting a small gathering at the ranch this Sunday after church. Nothing formal, just a few neighbors for dinner. Isaac mentioned you have Sundays free. We'd be pleased if you join us. The invitation surprised Hannah. That's very kind, but I have no way to get there. Isaac would be happy to escort you, I'm sure, Elizabeth said with a knowing smile. Or I could send our buggy if you'd prefer. Hannah considered the offer. Part of her, the cautious part that had learned hard lessons about vulnerability, wanted to refuse. But another part, the part that longed for connection, for normalcy, for a life beyond fear, urged her to accept. Thank you, she said finally. I'd be delighted to attend. Elizabeth's smile widened. Wonderful. Isaac can collect you at noon if that suits. After Elizabeth left, Hannah found herself both anticipating and dreading Sunday. The prospect of socializing in a group, of being judged by Isaac's family and friends, was daunting. Yet there was also excitement at the chance to see more of the country, to step beyond the narrow confines her life had shrunk to. Saturday evening found Hannah and Isaac once again dining at the hotel, though this time the conversation flowed even more easily between them. You've met my sister then, Isaac said, amusement crinkling the corners of his eyes. I have. She's quite formidable. Isaac laughed. That she is. Has been since we were children. She was the one who taught me to fish, can you believe it? Father was away with the militia, and she decided I needed to learn. His expression grew fond. Marched me down to the creek, showed me how to bait a hook, and wouldn't let me leave until I'd caught something. She mentioned a gathering tomorrow, nothing elaborate, just some neighbors, good food, maybe some music after. He studied her face. You don't have to come if you'd rather not. No, I'd like to, Hannah assured him. It's been a long time since I've been in company. William preferred to keep me isolated. Isaac's jaw tightened briefly at the mention of William, but his voice remained gentle. No one will expect anything of you except to enjoy yourself. My family is plain-spoken but welcoming. What about your brother? What's he like, James? He's the serious one, carries the weight of the world on his shoulders, especially since Louisa died, but he's a good man, the best I know. Isaac refilled her water glass. He'll like you. How can you be so sure? Isaac's smile reached his eyes. Because I do. The simple statement sent warmth spreading through Hannah's chest. It had been so long since someone had seen value in her, had wanted her company for its own sake. The next day, Isaac arrived precisely at noon, driving a well-kept buggy pulled by a handsome bay gelding. Hannah had worn her Sunday best, a pale green dress with modest lace trim at the collar and cuffs. You look beautiful, Isaac said as he helped her into the buggy, his hand warm and steady around hers. The journey to the Blackburn ranch took them through rolling grasslands dotted with wildflowers and occasional stands of cottonwood trees. Isaac pointed out landmarks along the way: the creek where he'd caught his first trout, the rise of land where they'd built the original cabin before the proper house, the distant mountains that marked the edge of their grazing territory. It's magnificent, Hannah said, drinking in the vast openness of the landscape. After months confined to William's small house and then the narrow streets of Cody, the expansiveness was exhilarating. It grows on you, Isaac agreed. I tried living in town for a while after we first came west, working at the livery. Couldn't stomach being hemmed in by buildings and people. Out here, a man can breathe. The ranch house, when they reached it, was larger than Hannah had expected, a substantial two-story structure of weathered wood with a wide veranda wrapping around three sides. Several horses were hitched at the posts, and the sounds of conversation and laughter drifted from inside. "Nothing fancy," Isaac said as he helped her down from the buggy, "but it's home." The gathering was already underway with about a dozen people congregated in the large main room. Elizabeth spotted them immediately, coming forward to greet Hannah with a warm embrace as if they were old friends rather than recent acquaintances. "I'm so glad you could come," she said, leading Hannah toward a tall, broad-shouldered man who shared Isaac's coloring but whose face bore lines of care that made him appear older than his probable years. Two children, a boy of about 7 and a girl who looked to be 5, stood beside him. "James, this is Hannah Jameson. Hannah, my brother James and his children, Thomas and Mary." James Blackburn's handshake was firm, his smile reserved but genuine. "Welcome to our home, Miss Jameson. Isaac's told us about you." "Only good things, I hope," Hannah replied, finding herself surprisingly at ease. "My brother's not one for idle chatter, so when he speaks highly of someone, we take notice," James said, a hint of humor softening his serious demeanor. Little Mary tugged at Hannah's skirt. "Are you going to be my new aunt?" she asked with a child's directness. Hannah felt heat rise in her cheeks as Isaac coughed and Elizabeth smothered a laugh. "Mary," James admonished gently, "that's not a proper question to ask someone you've just met." "But Uncle Isaac said, Mary," Isaac interrupted, his own face suspiciously flushed. "Why don't you show Hannah the kittens in the barn? I'm sure she'd love to see them." The little girl's face lit up. "Oh yes, they opened their eyes yesterday. They're in the hayloft with their mama." Hannah accepted the diversion gratefully, allowing Mary to take her hand and lead her outside, though not before catching a glimpse of the amused glance Elizabeth directed at her brother. The afternoon passed in a pleasant haze of introductions, conversation, and a bountiful meal that demonstrated Elizabeth's considerable skills as a hostess. Hannah found herself drawn into discussions about books with the schoolteacher from a neighboring settlement, gardening with the doctor's wife, and even politics with James, who proved to be as thoughtful as he was taciturn. Throughout it all, Isaac was a steady presence nearby, not hovering but available whenever she caught his eye. It struck Hannah how different this was from gatherings with William, where she'd constantly monitored his mood, adjusting her behavior to avoid triggering his temper. As twilight approached, someone produced a fiddle and furniture was pushed aside to clear space for dancing. Hannah watched as couples formed, enjoying the lively music without any expectation of participating. "Would you care to dance?" Isaac's voice came from beside her and she turned to find him offering his hand. "Oh, it's been a long time," she demurred. "It's just a simple reel," he said with an encouraging smile. "Nothing fancy." Something in his steady gaze gave her courage. "All right." His hand was warm as it closed around hers, guiding her into the set of dancers. The steps came back to her quickly, and soon Hannah found herself laughing as they circled and turned, her skirts swirling around her ankles. When the music shifted to a slower waltz, Isaac drew her slightly closer, though still maintaining a proper distance. His hand at her waist was firm but gentle, his steps sure as he guided them around the room. "You're a fine dancer," Hannah remarked, surprised at the ease between them. "Mother insisted we all learn, said civilization depended on men knowing how to do more than rope cattle and mend fences." His blue eyes crinkled at the corners. "I complained bitterly at the time, but I'm grateful now. She sounds like a remarkable woman." She was. "You would have liked her, I think, and she would have approved of you." The simple statement touched Hannah deeply. "Thank you for today," she said softly, "for including me. Thank you for coming." His voice was equally quiet, meant only for her ears. "It means a great deal to me." As the dance ended, Hannah realized she'd spent hours without once thinking of William or the fear that had dominated her life for so long. Instead, she'd laughed, conversed, danced, felt, for the first time in many months, like herself again. The ride back to town was peaceful, the night sky ablaze with stars that seemed close enough to touch. They spoke little, but the silence was comfortable, wrapped in the cool spring air and the rhythmic sound of the horses' hooves. At the boarding house steps, Isaac helped her down, his hands lingering briefly at her waist. "I enjoyed today immensely," Hannah said, reluctant for the evening to end, as did I. Isaac hesitated. "Hannah, I know it's soon, perhaps too soon given what you've been through. But I find myself thinking about you more than is probably proper." Hannah's heart quickened. "Isaac, you don't need to say anything," he assured her quickly. "I just wanted you to know that I care for you and that I'm willing to wait as long as necessary for you to feel ready for whatever might develop between us." The moonlight silvered his features, highlighting the earnestness in his expression. Hannah found herself touched by his consideration, his willingness to move at her pace. "Thank you," she said simply, "for understanding." He smiled, raising her hand to his lips for a brief, gentle kiss. "Good night, Hannah. Good night, Isaac." As spring deepened into summer, Hannah's life settled into a pattern that brought increasing contentment. Her position at the mercantile had become permanent, with Martha trusting her to manage the store alone on occasions when business called the older woman away. She'd moved from the boarding house to a small but comfortable room above the milliner's shop, giving her more independence and privacy. William had left town after a stern warning from the sheriff, reportedly heading for the gold fields in the Black Hills. The knowledge that he was gone lifted a weight from Hannah's shoulders, allowing her to walk the streets of Cody without constantly looking over her shoulder. And then there was Isaac. Their courtship, for that's what it had become, though neither had put a name to it, yet progressed at a measured pace that respected Hannah's need to rebuild her trust in men. They dined together when he came to town, attended church socials, and occasionally rode out to the ranch on Sundays for family gatherings. Isaac never pushed, never demanded, his patience seemingly endless. He listened when she spoke, valued her opinions, and showed his affection in 100 small ways, a wildflower picked along the trail, a book of poetry he thought she might enjoy, his unwavering attention when she shared stories from her day. It was on a warm July evening, as they walked along the creek that ran behind the town, that Hannah realized she was falling in love with him. They had stopped to skip stones across the water, laughing when Isaac's attempt went spectacularly wrong, splashing them both. As he helped her onto a fallen log to dry her shoes, his hands strong and sure, Hannah looked at his sun-bronzed face and felt something shift inside her, the last walls of protection crumbling away, leaving only the truth. "Isaac," she said softly. He looked up, still kneeling before her, his blue eyes catching the golden light of the setting sun. "Yes," words failed her. Instead, Hannah leaned forward and gently pressed her lips to his in a kiss that conveyed what she couldn't yet say aloud. For a moment, Isaac remained still, clearly surprised. Then he responded, his lips moving gently against hers, one hand coming up to cradle her cheek with exquisite tenderness. When they parted, his eyes searched hers, a question in their depths. "I'm not afraid anymore," Hannah whispered. "Not of you, not of this." His smile was like sunrise. "I would never give you reason to be." "I know," and she did, with a certainty that went bone deep. "That's why I think I'm falling in love with you." Isaac's intake of breath was sharp, his eyes widening before his expression softened into one of such joy that Hannah's heart clenched. "Hannah," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I've been in love with you since that day on the street when you stood up to that bastard with your chin high, even though you were trembling." He took her hands in his. "I know it hasn't been long, and I know you've been hurt. But I swear to you, for as long as I live, gentleness is all you'll know from me." The promise, so simply given yet so profound, brought tears to Hannah's eyes. "I believe you." That evening marked a turning point. Though they still moved carefully, mindful of Hannah's past and the town's expectations of propriety, their relationship deepened. Isaac began joining Hannah for supper at her rooms several evenings a week, always leaving at her respectable hour but making no secret of his intentions toward her. Martha, watching the romance blossom, nodded her approval. "That Blackburn boy's solid," she told Hannah one afternoon as they worked together. Got his head screwed on right, unlike most men his age. His mother raised him proper. He's a good man, Hannah agreed, unable to keep the warmth from her voice. Martha's shrewd eyes studied her. You're good for him too, you know, got a steadiness about you that matches his. And you've bloomed since he started coming around like a plant that finally got the right amount of sun. The older woman's words stayed with Hannah, reinforcing what she already felt, that with Isaac, she had found not just love but partnership, a balance that allowed them both to be their best selves. August brought scorching heat and the annual Founders' Day celebration in Cody. The entire town turned out for games, food, music, and dancing in the town square. Hannah, now accepted as part of the community, helped organize the refreshments, while Isaac volunteered for the committee setting up the dancing platform. As evening approached and lanterns were lit throughout the square, casting a golden glow over the festivities, Isaac found Hannah serving lemonade at one of the tables. "May I steal you away for a bit?" he asked, his expression unusually serious. "Of course." Hannah handed her ladle to a nearby helper and let Isaac lead her away from the crowds, toward a small gazebo at the edge of the square that had been decorated with paper lanterns and wildflowers. Inside, he turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "Hannah," he began, then paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "These past months have been the happiest of my life. You've brought something into my world that I didn't even know was missing until I found it." Hannah's heart began to race as she realized what was happening. "I know it hasn't been long," Isaac continued, "and if you need more time, I'll wait. But I also know with absolute certainty that I want to spend the rest of my life with you." He lowered himself to one knee, still holding her hands. "Hannah Jameson, would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" Tears welled in Hannah's eyes, not of sadness or fear, but of overwhelming joy. 6 months ago, she had fled a man who had used love as a weapon to control and hurt her. Now she stood before a man whose love was a gift freely given, with no strings or expectations except mutual respect and care. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, Isaac, I will marry you." His smile was radiant as he rose, pulling her into his arms for a kiss that promised a lifetime of tenderness. When they parted, he reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box. "It was my mother's," he said, opening it to reveal a simple gold band set with a small pearl. "If you'd prefer something different, it's perfect," Hannah interrupted, extending her trembling hand. As he slid the ring onto her finger, cheers erupted around them. Hannah looked up, startled to find they had an audience. Elizabeth, James and his children, Martha, the sheriff and his wife, and several other townspeople stood at the entrance to the gazebo, smiling broadly. "Did everyone know?" Hannah asked, laughing through her tears. "I might have mentioned my intentions to a few people," Isaac admitted, looking sheepish. "Only the entire town," Elizabeth said dryly, stepping forward to embrace Hannah. "Welcome to the family officially." The wedding took place in October, when the aspens had turned to gold and the air held the crisp promise of winter. The small church in Cody was filled to capacity, the town turning out in force to witness the union of a couple who had become, in their own quiet way, a symbol of hope and new beginnings. Hannah wore a gown of ivory silk that Martha and Elizabeth had helped her select from a catalog, with sprigs of dried lavender and white roses in her upswept hair. As she walked down the aisle on the arm of the sheriff, who had volunteered to give her away, her eyes remained fixed on Isaac, standing tall and handsome at the altar in a new black suit. His face, when he saw her, held such naked adoration that Hannah's steps faltered momentarily. How had she become so fortunate, she wondered, to find such love after such darkness? The ceremony was simple but heartfelt, their vows spoken clearly for all to hear. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Isaac's kiss was gentle yet filled with promise, drawing appreciative murmurs and a few good-natured whistles from the congregation. The celebration afterward, held at the town hall, lasted well into the evening, with music, dancing, and enough food to feed half the county. Hannah found herself passed from dance to dance, accepted warmly by neighbors and friends who had, in the months since her arrival in Cody, become like family. Finally, as the hour grew late, Isaac claimed her for the last dance, holding her close as the fiddle played a slow, sweet melody. Happy. He murmured against her hair. More than I ever thought possible, she replied, resting her head against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. Later that night, as they rode toward the ranch in a buggy decorated with ribbons and flowers by the town's children, Hannah felt a sense of peace that had eluded her for most of her adult life. The road ahead was illuminated by a full moon, the stars scattered like diamonds across the velvet sky. Isaac had built a small house for them on the ranch property, not far from the main house but offering privacy and independence. He had consulted Hannah on every detail, from the layout of the rooms to the color of the curtains, ensuring it would be a true home for both of them. As they crossed the threshold, Isaac surprised her by sweeping her into his arms. "Welcome home, Mrs. Blackburn," he said softly, carrying her across the threshold. The house was warm and inviting, a fire already laid in the hearth by Elizabeth's thoughtful hand. Flowers adorned the tables, and a small supper had been left covered on the kitchen table, though neither was hungry after the wedding feast. "Would you like a tour?" Isaac asked, setting her gently on her feet. "Yes," Hannah replied, though her heart was racing with anticipation of what would come after. He showed her through the cozy parlor with its comfortable chairs and well-stocked bookshelf, the kitchen with its gleaming new stove, the small study where Hannah could continue her love of reading and writing, and finally, the bedroom with its large four-poster bed covered in a quilt Elizabeth had made as a wedding gift. "It's perfect," Hannah said, turning to embrace her husband, "all of it." Isaac's arms came around her, strong yet gentle. "I want you to be happy here," he said seriously. "This is your home now to shape however you wish." "Our home," she corrected, reaching up to touch his face. "And I am already happy because you're here." His kiss was tender at first, then deepening as she responded. When he drew back, his eyes were dark with desire, but he made no move to rush her. "Hannah," he said softly, "I meant what I said that day by the creek. Gentleness is all you'll ever know from me. If you're not ready," she silenced him with another kiss. "I trust you, Isaac, completely." And she did. As they came together that night, Isaac's touch was reverent, his every caress designed to bring her pleasure rather than take his own. When Hannah tensed briefly, old fears threatening to surface, he paused immediately, murmuring reassurances against her skin, until she relaxed once more. Their union, when it came, was a revelation to Hannah, not an act of possession or dominance, but a sharing, a communion of bodies and hearts that left her breathless with wonder. In Isaac's arms, she found not just passion but healing, the final ghosts of her past laid to rest by the reality of his loving care. Afterward, as they lay entwined beneath the quilt, Hannah traced the contours of his face with gentle fingers, memorizing every line and plane by touch. "I love you," she whispered, the words still new enough to thrill her when spoken aloud. Isaac caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "And I love you, more than I have words to express." In that moment, Hannah knew with absolute certainty that she had found her place in the world, not just a physical home, but a spiritual one, in the heart of a man who valued her strength as much as her softness, who saw in her not someone to control but someone to cherish. The years that followed brought challenges, as all lives do, but also immeasurable joy. The small ranch house expanded as their family grew, first with the birth of their son, Samuel, a year after their wedding, and then their daughter, Grace, who arrived 2 years later with her father's blue eyes and her mother's determined spirit. Hannah discovered a talent for writing, eventually publishing stories in newspapers and magazines that captured the spirit of their frontier community. Isaac's skill with horses, led to a successful sideline breeding and training stock that became sought after throughout the territory. They weathered droughts and harsh winters, celebrated harvests and birthdays, mourned losses and welcomed new life. Through it all, their partnership remained unshakable, founded on mutual respect and a love that deepened with each passing season. On their 5th anniversary, as they sat on the porch of their home watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of gold and purple, their children playing in the yard under Elizabeth's watchful eye, Isaac took Hannah's hand in his. "Do you ever think about how different life might have been if you hadn't had the courage to leave him that night?" he asked quietly. Hannah considered the question. "Sometimes," she admitted. "But then I look at what we've built together, and I know that whatever led me to Cody to you was the greatest blessing of my life." Isaac's eyes, still as blue as the day they met, held hers with unwavering tenderness. "You saved yourself, Hannah. I just had the good fortune to be there when you did." "We saved each other," she corrected gently. "You showed me what love should be when I'd forgotten." He lifted her hand to his lips. "And you've shown me every day since what it means to be truly brave." As twilight deepened around them, Hannah rested her head on her husband's shoulder, content in the knowledge that the bruises and brokenness of her past had led her, ultimately, to this moment of perfect peace. William Sullivan, wherever he was, had no power over her anymore. The life she and Isaac had built together, their children, their home, their love, was stronger than any shadow from the past. "I was thinking," Isaac said after a comfortable silence, "that perhaps we might add another room to the house next spring. Samuel's getting big enough to want his own space." "That sounds perfect," Hannah agreed, envisioning the expansion of their home, just as their love had expanded to encompass children, community, and a future bright with promise. As stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Isaac stood and offered his hand. "Shall we put the children to bed?" Hannah took it, rising to stand beside the man who had kept his promise of gentleness through all their years together. "Yes," she said simply, "let's go home." And hand in hand, they walked into the warm light of the house they had built together, not just with timber and nails but with patience, respect, and a love that had healed wounds once thought beyond mending. 10 years later, the Blackburn Ranch had grown to become one of the most prosperous in the territory. What had begun as a modest operation now encompassed over 5,000 acres of prime grazing land, a herd of nearly 1,000 cattle, and a breeding program for quarter horses that drew buyers from as far away as California. Hannah, now in her mid-30s, had established herself as a respected writer, with a collection of short stories published by an Eastern press and regular contributions to several newspapers and magazines. Her pieces about frontier life, particularly those focused on women's experiences, had garnered attention not just in Wyoming but across the country. Their family had grown as well. Samuel, now 11, was the spitting image of his father, with the same dark hair and blue eyes, though he had inherited his mother's thoughtful nature and love of books. 9-year-old Grace was a spirited girl who could ride as well as any boy and had her father wrapped around her finger. And little James, named after his uncle and just turning 4, was a sunny child who brought laughter wherever he went. The house had expanded along with the family and their fortunes, with additions that included a proper study for Hannah's writing, larger bedrooms for the children, and a spacious kitchen where the family gathered for meals and conversation. Through all the changes and growth, one thing remained constant: the deep, abiding love between Hannah and Isaac. If anything, the years had only strengthened their bond, their understanding of each other growing more profound with each shared experience, each challenge overcome together. On a crisp autumn day much like the one on which they had married 15 years before, Hannah stood on the porch of their home, watching as Isaac taught little James to ride his first pony, a gentle old mare that had been Samuel's first mount as well. "Keep your back straight, that's it," Isaac called, walking alongside the pony as James giggled with delight. Hands quiet, remember what I showed you. Hannah's heart swelled with love as she observed the scene. Isaac's patience with the children was unwavering, his guidance firm but always gentle. He was the father she had hoped her children would have, strong yet tender, protective without being controlling, a model of what a man should be. Later that evening, after the children were in bed and the house had settled into nighttime quiet, Hannah and Isaac sat before the fire in their parlor, as they did most evenings. Hannah was editing her latest story, while Isaac reviewed breeding records for the horses. "I had a letter from the publisher today," Hannah said, setting down her pencil. "They want to commission a full novel. They think there's an appetite for authentic stories about the West, particularly from a woman's perspective." Isaac looked up, his face lighting with pride. "Hannah, that's wonderful news. I've always said your stories deserved a wider audience. It would mean more time writing, less time for household duties," she said, though she knew he would support her decision either way. "Then we'll manage differently," Isaac said simply. "Perhaps it's time we hired more help around the house. The ranch can certainly afford it now." He reached across to take her hand. "Your talent is a gift, Hannah. I've never wanted to stand in the way of you sharing it with the world." His ready acceptance, his pride in her achievements rather than resentment of her success, reminded Hannah yet again of how fortunate she was in her choice of partner. How different her life might have been if she had stayed with William, her spirit gradually crushed under the weight of his jealousy and control. "I was thinking about him today," she admitted quietly. "William." Isaac's hand tightened slightly on hers, though his expression remained calm. "What brought that on?" "I heard he died," Hannah said. "Martha received a letter from her cousin in Deadwood. Apparently he got into a fight in a saloon, pulled a knife on the wrong man. He's been gone 3 years now, but word just reached here." Isaac was silent for a moment, processing the news. "How do you feel about it?" he asked finally. Hannah considered the question. "Sad in a way. Not for myself, he's been dead to me since the day I left him, but sad that a life ended that way with nothing to show for it but violence and pain." Isaac nodded, understanding as always. "It's a reflection of your character that you can feel compassion for someone who hurt you so badly. I wouldn't have been capable of that compassion if you hadn't shown me what real love looks like," Hannah said softly. "You gave me the space to heal, to become whole again, to remember who I was before him." Isaac set aside his ledger and moved to sit beside her on the settee, drawing her into his arms. "You did the hard work of healing yourself, Hannah. I was just fortunate enough to be allowed to witness it." As she rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, Hannah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From the terrified young woman fleeing an abusive relationship to the confident wife, mother, and writer she had become, it was a transformation that sometimes still amazed her. "You know what today is?" Isaac asked, his voice rumbling beneath her ear. "Tuesday." Hannah replied, puzzled by the question. He chuckled. "Well, yes, but it's also 15 years to the day since you first arrived in Cody, since our paths first crossed at Ida's breakfast table." Hannah looked up at him in surprise. "You remembered that?" "I remember everything about those early days," Isaac said, his blue eyes warm with memory. "How you kept your head down but still had fire in your eyes. How you stood up to William on the street even though you were scared half to death. How beautiful you looked that first Sunday at church, with sunlight coming through the windows and catching in your hair." Tears pricked at Hannah's eyes. "I didn't think you'd notice me so much back then." "I noticed everything about you," he said simply. "Still do." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box. "I was going to wait until our anniversary next month, but perhaps today is more fitting." Hannah opened the box to find a delicate gold locket, oval-shaped and engraved with intricate scrollwork. When she pressed the tiny clasp, it opened to reveal miniature portraits of their 3 children on one side and a tiny lock of dark hair on the other. "Isaac, it's beautiful," she breathed, lifting it from the box. "Open the back," he urged gently. She turned the locket over and discovered a hidden compartment. Inside was a small piece of paper, folded many times to fit the tiny space. When she carefully unfolded it, she found his handwriting, cramped to accommodate the size constraints. Gentleness is all you'll know. My promise kept and renewed each day. With all my love, Isaac. Tears spilled freely now as Hannah looked up at the man who had kept that promise for 15 years, who had loved her through joy and sorrow, success and failure, with a steadiness that had become the bedrock of her existence. "Help me put it on," she asked, her voice thick with emotion. Isaac took the locket and fastened it around her neck, his fingers brushing against her skin with the same tender care he had always shown her. When she turned to face him, he wiped away her tears with his thumb, his touch as reverent as it had been on their wedding night. "I love you, Hannah Blackburn," he said softly. "More today than yesterday, less than tomorrow." Hannah reached up to cradle his face, the face that had become as familiar to her as her own, yet still caused her heart to quicken when he looked at her as he was doing now, as if she were the most precious thing in his world. "And I love you," she replied, "for keeping your promise. For helping me build a life I never dared to dream was possible." Their kiss was sweet with the flavor of years shared, challenges overcome, and a love that had only deepened with the passage of time. When they parted, Isaac rested his forehead against hers, a gesture that had become a sort of shorthand between them, a private moment of connection in the midst of their busy lives. Outside, the wind rustled through the autumn leaves, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its mate. Inside, the fire crackled in the hearth, casting a warm glow over the home they had built together, not just the physical structure, but the life they had created, rich with love, respect, and the gentle care they showed not just to each other, but to all who crossed their threshold. As they sat together in comfortable silence, Hannah's fingers traced the outline of the locket that now rested against her heart, a tangible reminder of Isaac's promise and of how far they had come together. From a chance meeting between a broken woman and a kind cowboy to this moment of perfect contentment, it was a journey she would not trade for anything in the world. "What are you thinking?" Isaac asked, noticing her contemplative expression. Hannah smiled, her heart full. "That some promises are worth waiting for, and some men are worth trusting with your heart." Isaac's answering smile was all the confirmation she needed that she had made the right choice, all those years ago, to believe in the possibility of a love that healed rather than harmed. That choice to trust again, to risk her heart one more time, had led her here, to this life filled with purpose, joy, and a love that continued to grow with each passing day. As the fire burned low and the hour grew late, they retired to their bedroom, hand in hand as they had been since the beginning. And as Hannah drifted to sleep in the circle of her husband's arms, she knew with absolute certainty that the broken woman who had stumbled into Cody 15 years ago had not just been made whole again. She had been transformed into someone stronger, braver, and more capable of love than she had ever imagined possible. All because a cowboy had made a promise and kept it every single day. Gentleness is all you'll know.